Hey, here's a crazy thought. Colorblind Architect's actually going to talk about architecture today. Welcome back to the Colorblind Architect Podcast. I'm your host, David, and today we're going to be talking about architecture. Yes, I know, the Colorblind Architect actually talks about architecture. What a weird thought that is. So, what are we doing? What topic? Well, we're going to talk about client relations. This is something that has actually kind of come to the forefront of my mind recently. Because, I have this one client that he's definitely been having a really hard time understanding the process and the way things are supposed to work. And a large part of it is because in his line of work, it's a much more transactional sort of business that he's in. He does retail and repair. And I'm not going to mention what specific kind, largely because that's a little bit too much information about a client. However, what he does do is, obviously he understands like quick turnaround times. The repairs that he's doing usually have to be done within a couple hours, right? So. And any of the retail work that he does, that's a very transactional thing. It happens really fast. So it's something that he doesn't necessarily understand, a process that takes a really long time, like architecture. So you might be wondering, then what is the timeline supposed to be for architecture? Well, it really depends on a lot of factors. And here's one of the things that a lot of architects complain about, but we often don't actually tell the public. The thing that we complain about a lot is stuff like HGTV, these reality TV shows that make it seem like all within a half an hour, the entire house is going to be remodeled. Now, obviously, they break it up on the TV show somewhat and make it seem like there's some elapse of time. But it's a half an hour show made, comprising sometimes months and months of time. And yet, people still get this feeling like it's supposed to be this really rapid turnaround. So, that's the first thing that I want to talk about, timelines. In architecture, depending on where in the country, what jurisdiction you're in, it can really affect your timeline. And also the type of project. If you're going to be looking at doing a single family home, for example, and assuming this is a greenfield site, and by greenfield I mean that it's raw land, it's never been built on before, so there's nothing existing that could cause you problems. So let's just keep that really simple. Assuming that that's the case, then you're probably going to be looking about 6 to 8 weeks for design, about 6 to 8 weeks for the permit process, and then you're probably looking at about 6 to 8 months for construction. That is probably one of the simplest types of projects. So notice what I just said there, though. You could be looking at, let's say, 9 to 12 months to be able to get a single family home done. Now you might be wondering, yeah, but the home builders, they get it done so... See, here's the difference. On a home builder, they already have plans that are already pre-engineered. They know exactly what the cost is. And they already have a full slate of subcontractors ready and raring to go. So, if you're hoping to go to an architect and get a custom design, and you're hoping to do it for less money than what a home builder is going to be able to provide you a home for, I'm sorry to tell you, that is highly unlikely. Strangely, yes, the home builders, they might be ripping you off in many ways. And I could talk about that on another episode. But for the most part, they actually give you a pretty good deal. And a lot of it is because of the replication. This replication of the product is what brings down the cost. The problem with traditional architecture, where you have a custom design, is every single building is a prototype. Well, as we all know in manufacturing, the prototype's always the most expensive. Why? Because you're reinventing the wheel from the ground up. I mean, this is the first time this particular product has ever been built. And so there's going to be some hiccups along the way. There's going to be some cost overruns. So the first thing I would say on anybody considering starting any kind of project with an architect, I just want to make it really clear. Really consider, are you willing and are you able to handle cost overruns? Are you willing and are you able to deal with the pain, the suffering, the nightmares that come from a lot of the hiccups that come along the road? And no matter how good your architect is, no matter how good your contractor is, there's always going to be hiccups. It's just the way it works in construction. You know, obviously, the better the architect and the better the contractor, the fewer the hiccups you're going to have. And hopefully, it's going to run really smoothly. You're going to have very few problems. But just understand that there will be problems. And it's natural, okay? It's natural because construction is a very messy business. Not necessarily because of any kind of corruption, just because, again, you're talking about every single one of these projects is unique and the first one when you're doing custom. And even when you're building, you know, with a home builder, to a certain extent, there's still going to be some hiccups. Let's just disillusion you of that right away. So timelines on a commercial project can go much longer. So there's a lot of different factors that play into that. So depending on the project type, the project size, that can affect the length of time that it takes to actually get the design produced. You can also have the need for zone changes, or maybe you need a conditional use permit from the planning commission. Maybe your city has an architectural design review process. Maybe it's a historic property and you have to go through a landmarks commission. There's so many different facets of getting a project approved, let alone getting through the building permit process. So after you get through all the planning processes, which, like I said, the planning process includes zone changes, conditional use permits, architectural design reviews, landmarks commission, all kinds of things that are going to affect your timeline. That's just the planning part. That's before you've even gotten into the quote-unquote design process. And by the way, just to get into the planning process, you have to put a fair amount of pre-design. And I say pre-design kind of tongue-in-cheek. So pre-design is essentially the part of the process where a lot of the building is designed, but it's with the aim of getting your planning approvals. Because most planning departments, they're going to require you to have floor plans, a site plan, oftentimes full civil engineering. Oftentimes they'll want full landscape architecture, so all of your landscape plans already done. They'll want you to have colored elevations, and they'll also want you to have renderings. This is a lot of money that you're going to be shelling out in order to get the planning approvals on the front end of the project. And this is before you even know if the jurisdiction that you're in is going to allow you to move forward. They could, in some instances, especially if you're going through a political process like a zone change, or even a planning commission process, which is also a somewhat political process, there's a chance that you might not get through. There's a chance that all that money that you spend will actually be wasted. Now, note I called it a political process. And maybe now you might understand why I'm so passionate about politics, because architecture is heavily affected by politics as much as I don't want it to. I honestly, I care about politics because, I care about my country. I care about I care about the welfare of people. And so obviously I'm going to be really passionate about a lot of my beliefs, a lot of my thoughts. But when it comes to architecture, I remember in my architecture history classes in college, I remember thinking to myself, man, I really hate these politicized architects. Like, for example, the architects of the communists, or the architects of the Nazi Party. If you really think about it, were those architects really trying to, for example, the architects of the Nazis, do you really think that those architects designing those neoclassical structures for Hitler, do you really think that they were super, patriotic, wanting to kill Jews and stuff like that? No, I don't think they were. I think they just loved the kind of work that they do, and they saw molding themselves into the political pretzel that they were being forced to fold themselves into in order to keep working, in order to keep providing for their families, in order to keep their families safe. Think about it. These people had families. They cared about their wife and children. And I say that because obviously back then pretty much all the architects were male. Not to say that there couldn't have been some female architects back in those days, but I'm pretty sure in the Nazi regime, I'm pretty sure all the architects that were working for Hitler were probably men. I don't know that for a fact, but anyways, just a little pronoun disclaimer there. So let's get back to my point. My point is, I think most architects just want to create beauty. They just want to create beautiful buildings that function well. It's part of the passion of just about any architect in the profession. Every architect I've ever met, that's kind of what drives them, is creating these buildings that add beauty and function and improvement to our lives. So to politicize it is actually anathema to every architect that I know. But yet, we're all forced as architects to be politicized, largely because in order to get things done, you do have to go through the political process. You don't, like I said, you don't get planning approvals without going through a political process. So that right there is something that should be known. Once you get through all the planning processes, you get your planning approvals, at that point you are free and clear to go ahead and submit for building permit. A lot of developers will actually hold off on the construction documents until after planning is done, largely because they want to make sure that they're not wasting even more money getting the permit drawings drawn up, because that involves all the details, all the sections, all the stair drawings, all the bathroom drawings. There's a lot of work that goes into that, not to mention all the structural engineering, the mechanical engineering, the electrical engineering, the interior design, the fire protection engineering, and so many other facets of the design that have to be considered before you get to what's called a permit set. The permit set is where you're actually ready to file for your building permit, that the drawings are essentially construction ready, but they have to go through the city first. So this is where a lot of money gets spent. The building permits themselves are also extremely expensive, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. You may also have impact fees, or development assessments, or whatever they call them. Impact fees are extremely expensive. The reason for an impact fee is to cover the cost of things like parks and schools, fire departments, fire stations, police stations, stuff like that. It's to help reduce the cost of all these ancillary government services that are necessary in order to create a functioning civil society, with the idea that you're developing something new. So for example, if you're building a new, let's say you're building a new apartment building, well, every single one of your tenants in that apartment building will also need these services like parks and schools and police and fire and all this stuff, right? So that's where the impact fees come in. They get to be really expensive. I know here in Salt Lake, for just a single residential unit, regardless of whether it's a single family or a multi-family unit, it is close to the order of, maybe about $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, depending on whether it's single family or, and I don't know this for certain, so obviously double check if you are watching from Salt Lake. But the point is that that's a significant cost. So multiply that, let's say if you have a 50-unit apartment building, at $5,000 a pop. Your 50-unit apartment building, just the impact fees alone, you're adding $250,000 that you're paying the city outright at the beginning for, just to be able to get your building permit. So there's a lot of costs involved. It's extremely expensive and very time consuming, because you're also going to be having a good bit of time. Like I said, the building permit process on the typical house, is pretty short. On a multi-family apartment building, it might be 4 to 6 months. In some cities, you might be looking at, like for example in Seattle, you might be looking at 2 years to get a multi-family project through the city. So there's a lot of factors that go into this. And so the first thing you need to do anytime you're planning any kind of development, any kind of construction, talk to your architect and seriously, take them at their word for what they're saying. Because usually it's because they have a lot of experience. They've been through this 100 times over at least. So they're not exactly desirous to try to sell you on the idea that, oh, it's going to be a cakewalk, it's going to be super easy, because all that's going to do is get you angry. All that's going to do is have you steaming at the fact that things aren't done as fast as you thought it was going to be. And if your architect's telling you fairy tales that it's going to be done in like a week or two, well, maybe you should consider talking to another architect. But that's the point. Anyways, I just thought I'd give that little bit of information, that little help, because I know that as an architect, there are a lot of people out there who could benefit from the information that I can provide. So anyways, I'm going to pop into the office. I'm going to get some work done. Thank you. Again, I'm the Colorblind Architect. Peace out.